All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seth Feman. I am the Deputy Director for Art and Interpretation and the Curator of Photography at the Chrysler Museum. If you're here in Norfolk or in the Tidewater area, I'm especially thankful that you're logging in. It turned out to be a weirdly beautiful day, and I know that you could be outside, but I'm glad you're here joining us. I'm going to do a couple of little housekeeping things before we get started and before we introduce the guest. At any point, if you have a question or a comment, I'll invite you to use either the chat function or the Q&A function. My colleague Emily in the education department will be monitoring those, and at the end, we'll spend some time answering those. I've seen Alejandro do a couple of these talks before, and he's gotten some really good questions, and it's always exciting to see what our guests have to ask, so I encourage you to do so. We're wrapping up our year of online events, and we have one more curator. This is the last live with, and we have one more curator in your computer on January 10th, and it's one that I'll be doing on photography from the collection. It's at 2 p.m., and I hope that you'll sign up. In the spring, we'll launch a new series, and we're still working out the details, but one of them will be cocktails with curators, where curators and a cocktail artist will join forces and talk about a work of art and invite you to make a cocktail that could pair well with that work of art. So it'll be a fun and light activity. And then we'll also have several other kinds of online as well as outdoor activities as the weather warms up. We're hoping that as things improve and people feel comfortable visiting us, they'll also feel comfortable doing so outside. So we'll try to do some activities around the museum as well. If you enjoy what you see, please join me in thanking our members for making this possible. Their support makes these kinds of programs manageable for us to take and provide. And we're grateful for their support. We would also love it if any of you out there who are not members would like to join us, or if you just enjoy what you see and you are already a member, go to our website, go to the donate button and show your support there. I will just put in a plug and say that memberships make great Christmas gifts, and you're too close to Christmas to send things, so you might as well do some e-sending and send some memberships. People love getting those as gifts. So the conversation today is related to the exhibition Alejandro Cartagena, Foto Structure, Foto Estructura, which is on view until January 24th. We extended it a little bit. We are open at a limited capacity, so you can go online and reserve a ticket and come see the exhibition if you're comfortable doing so. If you're not comfortable doing so in person, I would invite you to visit the website of our exhibition partner, the George Eastman Museum, where they've created an excellent virtual walkthrough of their installation of the work. And it's really wonderful. You can walk through in a virtual way and then read the labels, and you can listen to the audio tour that Alejandro did in both English and in Spanish. And with that, I should also, before we go any further, thank our partners at the George Eastman Museum, Nick Marshall, Sarah Evans, and especially curator Heather Shannon. This project was a partnership, but Heather and her team really did the lion's share of the work, and we all owe them our gratitude. So now here we are. Welcome, Alejandro. I'm very glad that you're here. Alejandro is known in the photo and in the larger art community for his book arts, his documentary work, and what we might conceptualize differently is conceptual work that is kind of documentary work, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, like the work that we have here on view. He's exhibited his work all over the world. He's based in Monterey, and you're looking at his studio here on the screen. He's exhibited internationally more than 50 shows, and his work is in collections including SF MoMA, the George Eastman Museum, MFA Houston, and the list goes on in the United States. The appeal of this show, and if you haven't seen it already, we'll get to some images of it, but the appeal when we were first looking at this work, as opposed to showing necessarily other bodies of work that Alejandro has created, was that it interrogates the way that we read a photograph, something that I have a strong interest in, and our collection has a kind of inbuilt interest in. Alejandro's solution to this question, or his way of proposing maybe an answer, was to remove the people. And you'll see how he did that in various ways. And when you remove the people, you're removing a kind of source of nostalgia and longing from the work. You're removing the thing that you tend to focus on, but it ultimately reveals these deep structures of photography that are borne out when you see them in repetition. The way the medium itself shapes how we perceive and understand. And the show itself really parses the grammar or the language of representation in photography. But one of the things that surprises me the most about the work, and you'll see it when we get into it, is that the cutaways, and he literally cuts the photographs, he produces a new form of longing that sort of overrides the longing that he's taken away, a real desire to restore what's missing, to project ourselves into it, or to see our family in the images, implicating very much how longing itself is part of that language of photography. So it's a reversal that will make a lot more sense when we start getting into it. So with that, which if you haven't seen the work, maybe doesn't make any sense, and maybe will make a little bit more sense when we get into it, I'll welcome Alejandro and invite him to kind of bring us up to speed in how he got to this body of work.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Seth, for that introduction. I mean, I got goosebumps in the way you explain it. It's really exciting to see how the work can relate to people. And, once you let go of a body of work and you show it to the public, it becomes something new. And that's just beautiful. And I'm always excited to have that experience. I guess that's why the name for an art show is it's an expo. You're exposing yourself to whatever reactions you get from people, and I think that is a really nice way to think of art. It's you're exposing yourself, and in that sense, I wanted to. Before going directly to the body of work, I wanted to expose where I come from and why those images exist in my body of work and in my career. And I was talking to Seth yesterday, and I wanted to do this kind of roadmap to what is there at the museum right now. And it all started with the archive. In 2004, 2005, I decided to quit my job in the restaurant and hotel business, and I started to work in a photography archive as a digitizer of their archive. They had more than 300,000 pieces, and my day job was from 9 to 5 looking at other people's works and just scanning picture after picture after picture. And that really brought me into photography. That's how I learned photography, through scanning other people's work. I usually start with this image because this is kind of the same area where this picture was taken. And this picture was taken by George Eastman himself. He came to Monterey at the beginning of the 20th century and took some pictures of the Monterey downtown, which is where I have my studio. So, you're always looking for these little things that make your career interesting. And this is one of the things that I'm really excited about, how this person who basically democratized photography and made it accessible to a wide range of people was here in my city, documented my city at that a century ago. And now I'm here in this earth a century later, documenting the same spaces with 100 years of change on top of it. This is another picture by Eastman. This is like 5 minutes away from here. So it's really, really, without even planning it, the archive was a place from where to start my career. And it really grounded to where I could go. And I was looking at pictures sometimes. I mean, there were famous people, yes, and then there were unknowns, vernacular photography. This is a mother on her deathbed, and all the sons taking care of her, a birthday party, and all these pictures here are unknown photographers. And that was also something that really intrigued me about photography, and how the medium is constructed, how meaning is constructed. Sometimes it has to do with the author, sometimes it's the camera, sometimes it's the context, sometimes it's the history behind the image. I mean, there's so many variables behind an image, and that really started to intrigue me as an archivist, as somebody who was working with the archive. And I started to see photographers that we knew who the or photographs who we knew the people who took the picture. Like this one, this is Eugenio Espino Barros. He's from Monterrey, and he, since he was 18, 19, he started to document all over Mexico. He photographed this oil landscape. I mean, this could be California for all we know, you know. And those types of images aren't really well known, and that also really struck me as something important that photography does, that it constructs these stories and these histories that sometimes aren't written histories. And so photography has that power to give you a sense of a place through images. This is also very close to here to from where I live, and this has changed dramatically in the past 40 years. He was also a master photoshopper. I mean, I'm talking, this is the 1960s. There was no Photoshop, nothing digital. This is a maquette he would photograph for an architect. What you see there isn't a real building. This is a maquette. Then he would photograph the skies, and then he would photograph every individual car and put it all together, an ensemble. A collage of sorts from the 1960s, so that the architect could see what would that building look in real life. And this building did get built here in downtown. But it
Wow.
was amazing the details he would put into these collages or renders, if you may, of photography in the 60s. He was also a professional photographer in the sense that he would do commercial photography. And I had the chance to scan his more than 3,000 works. He started photographing in 1906, 1907 up to 1976, 77. So that's a 70-year career. And we were doing a book in the archive of his work, and I scanned his whole body of work. So that, I mean, that is something that not a lot of people get to do, you know, to have somebody's body of work and just scan absolutely every single image. He started photographing in large 11 by 14 plates, glass plates, and ended up photographing in 35 millimeters pictures. So to see the change in the styles, to see the change in the formats, and to physically have them, that was just for me a game changer. And really understanding how an artist, a photographer can have all these different styles during his time as a photographer. This is another photographer here from Monterrey, and I love this picture because it really relates to what I ended up photographing, also photographing, and then what is part of this show. And it's the idea of family and how family is built, and what is the contemporary family. This is a family from 1936 with 2, 4, 6, 8 children. I mean, this doesn't happen that often now in Mexico. But when you see this and this picture that comes up, this is where things for me start to get interesting. This is my work. And when you come from here and you think, well, if this is the composition of a family in, you know, almost 100 years ago, how is the composition of family going to be when you have an architecture that's being built this way? And what was the architecture for this type of family to really operate? And those connections with the history of photography, and especially my own history of photography, because this isn't universal history, you know, this is the history of my place, my town, my state. I think that's really important for artists and photographers to find that type of kinship with the producers, the artists, the photographers who came before, to try to understand how you can either renovate that narrative of how that place was constructed, culturally, aesthetically, and see what you can bring to the conversation. These houses, and after 5 years of working at the archive, I had the urge to create my own images of the places that I live in. So I had a medium format camera, a large format camera, and I went out to document the city, document the suburbs. And the suburbs was something that was booming at that time. We had, there was a law that had just been passed at the beginning of the 21st century here in Mexico, where communal land outside the cities was going to be able to be parceled and sold to particulars. And so developers took advantage of that and started to build these suburbs outside of all the major cities of Mexico. And things like this started to happen, where the picture on the top is from Apodaca City and the picture on the bottom is from Escobedo City, and they're exactly the same houses. And for me, coming from the archive and seeing the importance of how photography builds future narratives of who we are as a culture, it was very alarming that there was going to be this flattening of narrative, because the birthday party in Apodaca was going to look exactly the same as the birthday party in Escobedo. So suddenly we were going to become, I don't know, in 20, 30 years, a generic culture with no sense of place, nowhere to cling from, compared to the other images that I was scanning from years behind. So it was alarming and also intriguing at the same time. Another part of my documentary practice was looking at how these developments, these suburban developments, were taking a toll in nature, especially in the waterways. We live in a semi-desertic area here in Monterrey. So water is very scarce and very protected. So we have a bunch of dams around the metro area. And what basically what that does is it kills streams and rivers that, don't have so much affluence of water. So they reroute the water to the dams, and then from there send it to the developments that are being built. And you have all these scars of development all over the metro area and the outskirts. This is the Santa Catarina River. It goes straight through Monterrey and through 4 of the metro area cities. And it's been a river that's been, it has destroyed the city over and over again. Monterrey has, if I'm not mistaken, it was founded in the 16th century. And a year after it was founded, a hurricane came in, a flood, and it destroyed the city, and it was rebuilt on the northern side of the river. And it's this river that's caused many, many deaths over the years. And I'll show you a body of work that talks about that in just a second. These are the people who live in these suburbs. These are the people who actually bought the houses. And I wanted to finish that body of work with that. I went in first at the start, where everything was beautiful and really well painted and there was barely any trash, like an ideal scenario. And suddenly you have the people who have to deal with these suburbs, and it's a bunch of problems. There's no transportation systems, electricity is scarce, water is scarce, gas is scarce. I mean, it is a big problem for them to live in these suburbs, but they're willing to dive into the idea of home ownership, because they were being sold that this is what's going to make your life better. But sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So here I was photographing with a large format camera. So it was the beginning of the drug war here in Monterrey. So it was kind of sketchy to be walking around with a large tripod and a camera. But at the same time, I was always visible. So people easily would come up to me and ask me, what were you doing? I'm not gonna run off, take a picture of you and go away. It was a calming but scary situation at the same time. Ironic things like this happen where you have the toy house that's almost the same size as the real house.
Mhm.
And then these things start to happen where you saw where I started to see cars from pictures of the suburbs of the US from the 80s and 70s showing up in the suburbs of Mexico in the 2000s.
Mhm. Mhm.
And because of the NAFTA treaty between the US, Canada, and Mexico, we as Mexicans can import a car that's 10 or more years old into Mexico and not pay import tax. So suddenly you have all these Mexican suburbs filling up with American suburb cars. So
Mm.
there was a deja vu there happening with, with these historic images of American suburbs. I'm photographing Mexican suburbs with the same cars in both pictures. That was kind of crazy. And that kind of made me focus a little bit on transportation. And the next project I'll show you, which is Carpoolers, has all to do with that. This is what the suburbs look after 4 or 5 years, people living in them. And a lot of them were left, are not being used as houses, but more as businesses. Here you have Diaperland, Alex Burgers, a pharmacy, because it's so expensive to live outside of the city and transportation is scarce that people decide better to rent out their house, go back with their in-laws,
Mm.
and pay off their mortgage with the rent and live close to where they work.
Mm.
So I call it a copy paste of American culture home ownership. And because you can't copy paste culture, or you can, but you have some side effects that you don't expect. And this book that you're seeing here on the screen, this is an amalgamation of 13 years of working with the idea of home ownership here in Mexico. So what I did is I appropriated this book for dummies of home ownership, of American home ownership, and I inserted my images in there
Mm.
to show this contrast between this impossibility of adapting a cultural trait, an American cultural trait, to the Mexican culture. Home ownership, yes, we can have home ownership, but it just doesn't work the same. And the markets aren't the same, the real estate isn't the same, the securities aren't the same, the equities aren't the same, but yet the way the houses are built here and sold have so much about the American style of selling houses that has created a big problem in major cities here in Mexico. So this is the book. When you have a chance, you can see the rest on my website. The next project I did was Carpoolers, and I think it's maybe the body of work that I'm most well known for. And the people who were buying these houses, like I said, had no transportation systems because the houses are built so fast. Infrastructure takes a year or 2 years to actually get there. The roads, not even bus transportation. So you have people solving their problem of transportation. They get together in a corner, and their buddies, their friends, or their patrones, their
Patrons.
bosses pick them up and then take them to the southern part of the metro area where there's a lot of construction. And because I went to the same spot at the same time for a year, I would see the same truck in different days. So this is the same truck in 3 different times. And then little things happen where you have the same guy sometimes sitting in the same place reading a newspaper, like almost like power struggles inside these
Mm.
little living spaces that these guys have to deal with. And it was amazing because suddenly I felt like I was photographing inside the little houses,
Mm. Mhm.
but in the trucks. I always respected and felt that to go inside the houses of the people were a little bit of too much invasion of their privacy. And suddenly I saw them like they would be hanging out with their friends, in their house, reading a newspaper. And I thought that was also a unity between these 2 different projects that I had done in 2 different styles, which was also very risky for me, I felt at that moment. And I think as soon as I felt it did work, I was able to let go of this
Mhm.
stylistic structure that sometimes artists have, that okay, this is my color palette, this is the way I'm going to photograph or paint, and they just go on and on for that. And I think this body of work that you have at the museum is a testament that I'm letting go of that
Mhm.
on over and over again. I started with large format camera, and then I went to digital, and then I went to archive, and I'm loose, and I can do color, I can do black and white. There's there's a sense of feeling alive and risking your style that really keeps me excited about my work, because if not, it would be just too easy just to perpetuate the same idea over and over again. This image that you see here, this is what started to happen when I was taking the pictures of the carpoolers and had already finished taking pictures of the suburbs. Those places I had photographed started to be drug war zones. So a lot of bad things started to happen there. It was a very gruesome time for the city. Um, just just horrible situation. It lasted like really bad for 4 years, from 2008 to 2012, and it really came to a tipping point with what you're seeing here. This is a casino. The drug cartel basically owned the town, and they came in and they said, "You have to pay us." The people didn't, and the casino owner said, "No, we're not going to pay you." So they burned the casino with 52 civilians inside, and that was for the whole city. It was just, the city stopped basically, and there were unofficial curfews. You were asked, if you don't have to go out, don't go out, which is actually very strange when the pandemic started, because we lived that, 8 years ago. That was the situation. We wouldn't go out because of the violence around our houses. And I wanted to say something about that, but I'm not a war photographer. I didn't want to risk myself. But somehow I thought conceptually I can do a body of work that can talk about the violence that I was living. It could talk about the paranoia. I mean, I become really, really paranoid in this part of my life. And this body of work was my first thinking of the archive as a way to produce a body of work. So, and first I wasn't that confident to use other people's work. So this was my own work from 2004 and 2005. I had traveled all the state of Nuevo León, taking pictures and scanning pictures for the archive. And the pictures I took there were the places where the drug war was starting. And so what I did, I asked an editor to take my pictures and try to find the drug war in
Mm.
my pictures, that I didn't even know the drug war was there, but it was there. So this was my first heartbreaking moment of letting go of my images and letting them be treated as an archive, and somebody else finding meaning apart from the meaning that I had put into the images while I was taking the photographs. So that was really interesting, and I think what opened up the possibility of thinking of working with my images and as archive, and other people's works as archive and as my work. And we did this book. It's done in an uncoated paper with a Riso, sorry about that, Riso printer. So the ink doesn't really settle. So
Mhm.
when you see the book, you're actually getting your hands kind of dirty and blackened.
It's sort
So
of
I,
like newsprint.
like newsprint, exactly. So I wanted that, conceptually, to have that, these tales of hurt, of a culture that's hurting, touch you, and be in your hands. And I mean, it was a beautiful book, a self-published book. It came in this envelope. You had to break the envelope to actually get into the book. We included many narratives. We have a text from the president at that time of Mexico, explaining why the drug war was happening. And then we also included text from drug cartel people saying what they were doing, and it was exactly what we were living. It was so cacophonic, the cartel saying that the government was bad, and the government saying that the cartels were bad, and then people living the badness of the war. I mean, it was so complicated, and the book is that it falls into it. It's not bound, so it breaks up. There's posters, there's postcards, there's a lot of things happening at the same time. But I wanted that to have that feeling of uncertainty, and that's where it was a documentary about the uncertainty without having to actually photograph it. Um, uh, this body of work, Rivers of Power, has to do with that river that I showed you a few images back, the Santa Catarina River, which is where Monterrey was founded. And this was the first body of work where I said, okay, I'm going to take other people's work and I'm going to incorporate it into my image making and create new meaning through other people's works. So I went back to the archive. I was still friends with the people at the archive, and I said, hey, I'm doing this project about the river. And so they led me into the archive, and I found these images, and suddenly I found a new way to create meaning through the pairing of one image with the other. So here you have the governor of the state of Nuevo León saying something, I don't know what it was, but by putting a picture of nature, of land, it's almost like he's dictating, we're going to work with this land, we're imposing ourselves upon you. And so that was really beautiful for me to find, because suddenly it's this question that still haunts me is, when does meaning happen in photography? Does it happen when you take the picture, or does it happen when you actually make that picture into something, into a book, into an exhibition? Where does that meaning happen? And for me in this book, I was exploring the idea of meaning happening through pairing, through editing, through montage, almost like movie making. So here you have this governor inaugurating just a random thing, but then the line of the paper lining up with the river almost, and he's breaking that line, almost saying we have the power over that river. And it's been like that, there's always been this fascination with the Santa Catarina River, because it's prime real estate, it's right downtown. But they've built golf courses, soccer courts, a go-kart, how do you say, a go-kart, a track, a baseball park. I mean, they've built so many things, and year after year, there always comes a flood and it just destroys everything. So it's almost an impossible place. Right now, it's been 10 years since our last hurricane that looked like this, Hurricane Alex, and it destroyed everything. And the federal government said, no more. They made a decree and they said, you can't build anything on that river. We've lost so many millions of dollars to repairing the things that you put in there. There's not going to be any more things being built there. So they just took everything, all the debris, and then another hurricane came and it washed everything away. I mean, the little things that they had put, and this is what it looks like. And right now, after 10 years, it's a beautiful park. I mean, a park in the sense that it just has trees and water running through, little streams running through it, with no human doing something. It's just there. We just let it live by itself. But now there's a big plan by the federal government, by a new federal government, and that's what that means. A new government, new plans, and they want to build a stadium on top of the river, which is completely absurd. But the plan is there. It's in the federal budget. They want the National Mexico Stadium. They want to build it on top of a river that's killed thousands of people and destroyed the city over and over again. Let's see how that plays out in the next few years. Okay, so now I think that kind of gives you a sense of where I come from. this is me preparing and looking for material for the exhibition that is right now at the Chrysler. I would go to Mexico City to these trash markets in the outskirts of the city. People go to the trash, they sift through the trash, and they they pick whatever they think they could resell, and then they do these little markets where everything is thrown on the floor, and then you go there and you do the same thing again. And from those places, I would find all those images you see in the back. I would find the trash, buy them, bring them back to the studio. And this is me preparing some of the works for the exhibition. It's a labor-intensive process of cutting and detailing every single picture and creating these holes or these disappearances in the photographs themselves, and creating new meaning in images that I remember talking to Heather about this, that I feel they've han caducado, they've expired. They are expired photographs. The meaning for which they were done for is no longer there. You know, whoever wanted a picture of their family and threw it away, it's like that doesn't matter anymore. It's that feeling, that meaning is thrown away.
Because it's literally been thrown away.
Exactly. Yeah. So I felt that, you know, my archivist kicked in, and I'm like, I went there because a friend of mine is a super fan of, you know, reusing stuff. And we went there and I found like maybe 100 pictures. I'm like, oh my God, I have to come back. And then I started to collect them. And I think I collected 2 years before I talked to Heather about putting on the show. And yeah, so this is the starting point, looking for photographs, and eventually it kind of looks like this. And I think I'll stop talking and maybe we can start maybe with a conversation. I just wanted to give that, you know, background. And here we are. This is the Chrysler. This is what's up right now.
So it's incredibly helpful, especially for people who are listening in or watching in who aren't familiar with your work. I think one of the things that's a little challenging in our exhibition is that you walk in and you see these cutout images and there's no context for how you got to this. So it's really helpful to hear the process and your interest in the archive, and also in kind of conceptual idea of what a structure is, what a repeating structure is.
Yeah.
But so I'm wondering if you can, even just within this body of work, talk about how you started. You know, you had these images, you had them, you weren't sure exactly what to do with them. Exactly. I've heard you talk about it kind of sitting on the wall for a while, looking at you before you decided to take knife to image to start working with it. So can you describe that? How did?
Yeah. I mean, it all started. I mean, I was buying all these discarded images, and I had no idea what to do with them, just to save them. Actually, you can see here in the back, all these folders, they're filled with thousands of images. I was almost being like I was rescuing them. I felt like I was, you know, giving them a second opportunity. I didn't know what, but maybe something could happen with them. But it all started with, I from the lab I work with, we got an extra picture of a group picture of a graduating class, and it was there. It was here in the wall behind me, or in front of me, and it was there because we were going to take it back to the lab and we didn't take it back, and I was looking at it. And then one day I'm like, oh, I don't know. I just, out of the blue, I asked to one of my assistants, why don't you take out the people from the photograph? And so she took out the people from the photograph, and then what was left behind, this empty space was left there, and we were concentrated on the people, and we started to work to do some funky collages and do them in like a sun, and everybody layered on top of each other. So I wasn't really looking at what was left behind, but actually at the people themselves. And it was there for at least a year. And then suddenly it just, you know, and not going anywhere with the people by themselves, the emptiness of that image and the feeling that it doesn't matter if I don't know who those people are. I understood what the image was about and the meaning of the image. This was a picture taken and composed and printed in a way for in a way to show a group of people that have something to do with each other, which was school and graduation, right? So suddenly it was like, what? How do I know that? Where do these structures come from, and what are those structures that kind of hint me to how to read a photograph? And that's what really really, got me going, because this was, how does meaning get constructed in a photograph? And so what I started to do with all these pictures was group them together. And it was like, wait a minute. I mean, group pictures are printed in the same format. Like, these are 5x7 images. They're almost the same size. And the way they're composed, the space between the people and the background, I mean, it was like, wait, I mean, there's a structure. Even if you don't know who the people are, you understand what it was done for and what it was trying to portray. And that just, got me going. And then I'm like, okay, bring everything out, bring the whole archive out, and let's try to find patterns. And we found patterns in groups. We found patterns in people, in their portrait in the studio, patterns in a father taking pictures of their kid playing outside. I mean, they just started to show up in the archive. It was, you found two or three that kind of resembled the same practice or the same gesture, and then it was so easy to just go to the rest of the archive looking for, okay, men at work, and then just, because that is something that happens in photography. People photograph men at work. So, okay, let's look for men at work in the whole archive. And we found 9 pictures of that. Okay, women with skirts. We found one. Okay, let's go looking for women in skirts. And boom, we found like 15 of them. And that's how we built the body of work. It was simple, but it took some time to marinate inside of my mind.
You also come up with a kind of repertoire of cuts as well, that
Yeah.
sometimes you cut whole figures, sometimes you
Yes.
just cut face after face in these little
Yeah.
circles. Sometimes you cut groups out together. Sometimes
Yeah.
you just cut out some. Sometimes you cut out a face and you'll maybe rotate it and place it
Yes.
back on in a layer. I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. And I can at
Sure.
least say, for one of the things that we noticed when we were doing condition reporting, which is something whenever we bring in objects, we review
Uh-huh.
them to make sure that they're looking okay after shipment. And some of them, if you were to cut them differently, the actual structure of the photograph, literally the structure, would just
Yeah.
fall apart. Like
Yeah.
if you cut out all of the bodies, the top and bottom of the image would just separate. So you
Exactly.
had to have done just the dots for the faces. But
Exactly. Yeah.
is that
There
how you
was,
were making those decisions, or?
I mean, it was, again, the way the photographer and the camera needs to photograph things almost dictates the meaning of the photograph. So, like, for this, it's not only about the group, it's also about the context. This is a group, and it's really important to see that airplane in the back. So the way the photographer would compose the image is leave a little bit of air in the back, in the front, on the sides, so that we can see the group with its context. So that is a way to structure one type of group photograph. And then the other types of images are the group photographs where context isn't really important. It's just a backdrop. So here, for those types of images, we would just take out the faces, because the composition of the photograph wouldn't I mean, if we would cut out the bodies out of here, then it would just be 2 pieces of rag, and then there's nothing really there to understand how that image came to be or what it was about. So that was the way to decide what we can do with each type of image. And I mean, that was un reto. That was a challenge in itself. We did find the groups first, and then it was like, okay, Now, what are we going to do with these groups? So some were circles, some were complete cutouts. Like these are the Gerber babies.
Yeah,
And
can we talk about these for a minute? Because the Gerber babies and the identity panels are
yeah,
where the show really came together for me. And for the Gerber babies, what's so extraordinary about this one is that there's almost no data in
yeah,
the image left behind. You've cut away so much.
yeah.
All you see is like a little bit of shoulders,
Uh-huh.
some background details, and yet every one of these is clearly a baby. There's
Exactly.
no way that you could see this in any other way. It's so
Yeah.
little information, and your mind fully restructures the image.
Exactly. I mean, this was one of the first like groupings that we did that really made us feel confident about the show. And if you see if you analyze, I mean, you just said exactly why this is a structure. There's always fading to nothing around the baby, and these are photographs that have 30 years in between each other. I mean, it's a big span of years between one image and the other, and they're all printed in the same size, the same kind of tone paper, and the scale of the baby is almost the same. And this isn't one studio. This is many studios. So that's where you see that we've become this generic humanity. Photography has condensated the way we need to see ourselves so that we can identify ourselves to the rest of the community. You know, it's almost like it's imposed a code of how we need to photograph, in this case, babies, so that everybody can understand what a baby looks like. So that was fascinating and creepy at the same time. It's like, oh my God, photography has this power over us on how we think of ourselves and how we need to see ourselves.
And then it's sort of what struck me is that when we compared that one to the identity panels,
Mm-hmm.
that inverse is complete. I don't know if you had an
Yeah,
image.
I think it's, I'll fast forward and then we'll come back. There. Oh, sorry. There.
So these ones, you didn't do cuttings, you just
No.
assembled,
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to be the same people who have sat for very similar photographs. Maybe
Yeah.
they went to get a passport image and they
Mm-hmm.
got multiples. But what struck me about these, and it's something you talk about in the tour, is
Yeah.
that in the audio tour, is that they cease being people. There's something about them because you see them sometimes in two or three or four different
Yeah.
ways. Their identity is actually lost when you can see
Exactly.
their visage, their face. They
Yeah.
almost become empty in a way.
Exactly. In the insistence of trying to be individual, the insistence in trying to look as different every time you go to sit for a photographer, your identity basically fades away and you become this caricature that's trying to represent what a woman should look like, or a baby should look like, or a business person should look like. I mean, it was, I remember talking with Heather about this. It was like mind blowing after doing all these cuttings. And then suddenly these, without any cut, did exactly the same thing. You know, they were erasing their identity by this multiplication. And it's not them per se. It's my case is that I'm trying to say that photography does that. You
Right.
know, this availability of our own representation fades our individuality because of photography's code of how it represents us. So there's this Machiavellic thing happening in photography. And then we have, you know, our social networks, our social media has adapted that and has taken advantage that perfectly. And it's not that Instagram makes us all equal. It's photography used through Instagram or through
Mhm.
Facebook that has flattened us out. I think of Penelope Umbrico. You know this artist?
Yeah, we've shown
She
her
has
work before. Mhm.
beautiful work of the sunsets from Flickr. And it's this massive wall with all these sunsets she downloaded from Flickr. And it's like, there's this fascination, but nobody's picture exists because there's so many of the same thing. So instead of us becoming original or unique, we become ubiquitous and nothing at the
Yeah.
same time. It's a very strange thing to think about, but it does happen.
With the very medium that is meant to preserve us, preserve our
Exactly.
memory. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, we're starting to wind down in time, and
Hmm.
I'll re-invite people if they've got questions to go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A.
Hmm.
But I did want to ask you a little bit. 'Cause we talked about this before, and it's really in many ways surprised me. And that when Heather at the George Eastman Museum first showed this work, they opened it either right before the pandemic came or
Yeah.
shortly after. And then we got the work and we installed it sort of in the middle, I hope at the middle of the
Yeah.
pandemic. And one of the things that struck me, especially when I gave the first tour to some of our docents and visitor services staff,
Mhm.
was how meaning, and you brought up this question before, where does meaning happen? Where does the meaning get made? The meaning that I had seen in this show that you and Heather talked about on your online conversation several months ago had transformed dramatically. And we started talking about loss in these images, and especially in light of COVID, that
Yeah.
it's hard not to see these as kind of ghostly manifestations of
Yeah.
missing people, of absence. I wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit.
No, I mean, when you brought that up yesterday, I thought that was, I mean, I guess somehow I had thought about it, um, but in again, you always talk about the context, your immediate context, and these images really relate to, in some sense, this invisibility that victims of violence here in Mexico have. And when I've shown this work here in Mexico, that's kind of like the first place a lot of people read into. And ironically, somehow, the world has shifted to this sense of loss that is very much more universal. I mean, here you have a pandemic, a situation where so many people, so many lives have been lost, and you have these images that show blank spaces of memories of places where you put your nostalgia and your memories of good times, memories of the people you love. And when you go to an exhibition and suddenly nobody's there, the context in which the images are being exhibited in fill the meaning of the picture. And we were, when we were talking about this yesterday, I felt really fascinated. I was like, wow, I mean, for sure you cannot detach these artworks from our current moment that the world is living in. And I think that is a very beautiful thing for artwork to do. You can have the same thing happening. You can create something with one meaning, but once you let go of that, there's so much more meanings to be attached to whatever you're showing, that it's beautiful when it happens. Sometimes I'm sure there are artworks that are just very fixed and you can't take them out of the bubble. But I think a lot of artwork has that malleability to open up. And I don't think we've talked about this, but the images or these works are very psychological, in the sense that there is when it's not a specific thing that you're looking at, you can put whatever you want in there. And I think you touched that at the beginning. There's this potential for projection, for psychological projection in these works, that I think that's what's happening a lot with people reading the current
Yeah.
pandemic crisis into these images.
So getting a couple questions here. One of them is about how long it took you to collect all these and if you're still going to collect
Yeah.
them.
I'm not. I Since the pandemic started, I haven't gone to Mexico City. For the show, it took me 2 years to find the works.
And
Like
you work with studio team as well, who's
yeah,
assisting in this, right? So
yeah.
it's even longer than just you
Oh
alone.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, no, it's 2 years to collect the work, and then the studio team here helps me. Like we do, because what you're looking at is the real picture. There's no, I mean, there's a lot of failure. We have a lot of, you know, works that didn't make it, that didn't make the cut, no pun intended, that were discarded because we failed to cut it correctly, and that's it. We can't go back. So we killed that picture in a way. So it was a slow process. Once the George Eastman and the Chrysler Museum decided to do the show, it took me a whole year to actually produce, cut, frame, and prepare all these images with archive material. What you see here, this is Teresa. She's my preparator. So it's, and every single image has to be done this way. So imagine that. I mean, it's more than 130 pieces.
That's
The
right.
show.
It's incredibly, as we know from doing the condition reporting, it's incredibly laborious because
Yeah.
what you can't necessarily see on the screen, but if you have more time with it, maybe you could, and if certainly in person you can, but you can see that these, especially the multi-layer ones, there's
Mhm.
spacers that have to be constructed to hold things in
Yeah.
layers so that they don't flatten too much and you get a kind
Exactly.
of shadow behind them.
Mhm.
Another question that came up that you can probably see is how does color affect the meaning of the photograph? And so most of the images in the show are black and white, although
Yeah.
some of them have tinting to them a
Yeah.
little bit.
Exactly.
But there is color in at least that they're sepia, and that shows
Yeah.
age. So a lot of them have varying levels of kind of yellowing or
Yeah.
browning and silvering even in some cases. Can you
I mean
talk
that.
a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, when that happened, I mean, it was two. There's two stages to that, to the color, and it's that sometimes we had this grouping, and we had maybe one with a little bit more color, and it would either kill the group or fortify the group.
Mhm.
So sometimes we would have the 15 pictures that we wanted, you know, the theme, the format, everything worked, but the color wasn't there. So we would leave on the wall the 13 that worked, take out the two, and then, you know, I would go back to Mexico City and try to look for those two that were missing. So it was really, really specific what we were looking for. And the grids are very important for the meaning of the work. If the grid doesn't work, the work doesn't work, because
Mhm.
there is a repetition of the format, the scale of the faces, the scale of the print itself, that needs to work as a group. And what the group brings to the body of work is that it's not just random. It's like, wait a minute, if you really pay attention, you can see the structure, because it happens over and over and over again. And if we were to show just one of each of these grids, you know, like one picture, then it would be like a body of work about how I can transform a photograph. And
Mhm.
that's not the meaning of this work. You know, there is an aesthetic pleasure to seeing these images being cut up, but my work isn't about that. It isn't about my aesthetic grandeur, you know, my imagine, how can I imagine my and push the aesthetics of these images. It's not about that. It's about the structure. It's about how the meaning of this type of photograph gets constructed and shown. And that, I mean, I could have gone the other way of just making really beautiful images, but I felt that that just didn't really, it didn't work for me. It wasn't about that. So yeah, the grids, they are works. You can see one and it's, you know, it's cool, but the grid makes such much more of a point.
Mhm. Yeah, it was one of the challenges from a curatorial perspective of, oftentimes when we're choosing work to show, it's work that we've seen in life before, fully
Yeah,
assembled, fully put together. And so there was a bit of a leap of faith here that it was
yeah,
sort of gonna be that it needed that much work, that it needed to be
yeah,
these grids. And I'm glad that we did. And as you just put it, you can explain why, that it really, these works operate through repetition. Without the
exactly.
repetition, they don't have the same impact, or it just becomes something else.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. And they're beautiful images. Yes, you know, they can work as beautiful images, but the meaning, the point, and the, you know, la contundencia, the I don't know how to say that in English, but
The
the
impact of
point, the impact of the work comes through the repetition. I mean, I mean, you would, one would be like, oh, look, how funny, he took out, you know, a kid's face. But when you see this and the backgrounds are the same, the scale of the faces are the same, it's like, what is going on? You know,
Mhm.
how did we let ourselves be portrayed in such a generic way for years and years and years? You know, there are deeper cultural questions. It's almost like about the culture of photography in our human culture. Yeah.
Alejandro, thank you very much. We've gone a little bit beyond our time, and I
Okay.
think clearly, I think we could talk about this for a long
Yeah.
time. I hope people will come and check out the work. Or again, if you're not ready to come to the museum, you can go to the George Eastman website and do a
Please.
virtual walkthrough of their installation. At some point, Alejandro is putting this into a book format,
Yes.
and it'll be interesting to see how that turns out, because there'll be new challenges there as
Yeah.
well as you try to give something that's dimensional into a 2D form. So
Yeah.
we're looking forward to you solving that challenge.
Yes.
Again, we've got one more virtual event and it'll happen in January, and I'll talk about photography, and then we'll have a new slate of programs for the spring. So check our website for more on that. Alejandro, thank you again.
Thank you, Seth.
Really a pleasure to be with you today, and
Thank you.
thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everybody. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.